Hey everyone, welcome to March's episode of Between the Brackets. This is a developer show brought to you by the North America Developer Ecosystem team. I am Kyle Paul. I'm regional lead for North America Developer Ecosystems. And with me backstage, I have, Madhusha Kure and Danny Fiorello, who I work with on the North America Developer Ecosystem team. And we help with communities throughout North America, such as the Google Developer Groups, Women Tech Makers, Google Developer Experts, and Google Developer Student Clubs. Many of you in the audience are likely part of these clubs. If you're not, you can learn more about our programs at g.co/dev/community. To learn all about our programs and kind of what we do with these communities. They're experts like yourselves that meet together, talk about Google technologies, and we help all of you organize in person, virtually, and we run opportunities like this to where you can meet developer advocates, other experts in the community to share ideas and I'll learn more fun things with what you can do with Google's developer technology. And today's Between the Brackets episode, we invite Martin Omander, who is a developer advocate on the Google Cloud team. And he is going to chat with us today about DevOps for web apps on Google Cloud. And some of the things that we're also going to look at is how to keep FinOps in mind. And, we'll hopefully kind of talk a little bit about what is FinOps and why is that important. So with that, and without further ado, I'd like to invite Martin on stage. Welcome, Martin.
Hey, thanks for having me, Kyle.
Awesome. It's great to have you on the show. And, you and I go way back. We've known each other for many years. Actually, Martin used to be in the role that I'm in now. So
Right.
it's very fun to kind of have this kind of go full circle. But I'm very excited to learn more about DevOps on GCP. I've messed around a lot with GCP, but I haven't really dove into too much on DevOps. So I'm excited to learn a lot here.
Yeah, right. Building your web app is only half the battle. Then you need to make it run to be useful.
Exactly. And how to scale it, how to, what is the best tools you should use, and basically, what features of GCP make it easy to run a web app.
Right.
So I guess to kick it off, do you want to give us a little bit of a background on, at a high level, DevOps for GCP?
Yeah. The way I think about DevOps is you build something and you don't build it once. You're always building because software, is never complete. It may be abandoned, but it's never complete. So you have this sort of building thing going on the whole time, and then out of that comes like releases that you deploy. So you need to have it really smooth over to your deployment, and then you need to take care of what's happening in development so that new versions come out and you build the right thing and build it correctly and test it and all that. And then once it's in deployment, the operations part, you need to really keep track of that so that one, the application stays up and you can serve your users. And then two, just as you were mentioning, that you run it in a cost-effective way. And sometimes, it's you can build something easily, but then you deploy it and it becomes very hard and very expensive to run it.
Yeah, very true. So with DevOps, sometimes there's some misconceptions with DevOps, and how can one of the things that DevOps is a little different, and so if you're trying to implement DevOps well, does that mean you're always on call, or how active do you have to be with GCP running DevOps? Because I know sometimes it's you're on call with DevOps, like you're always monitoring the situation. What does that
Yeah,
look and work on GCP?
right. Yeah, I think that so you certainly there are systems where yeah you need people on pagers because parts of the system can go down and so on. But I mean the web isn't that new anymore, right?
Yeah.
We've built fairly complex web apps for 20 years now. So some of this of just how you keep a web server from crashing, how you keep a database from crashing, a lot of that we sort of know, and it's undifferentiated heavy lifting, as somebody called it. So keeping a web server alive, for example, there is no reason that you today somebody should have to carry a pager because it's well known how to keep that web server alive. It's better to sort of let your cloud provider sort of carry the pager and let Google carry the pager so that when a web server crashes, Google figures it out and restarts it. And that is the area that I focus mostly on. We call it serverless, not because it's no servers, but because you don't, as a developer or as a DevOps person, you don't really see the servers yourself. Google carries the pager for you.
Gotcha. And so Google carries the pager for you in the serverless realm, and how do you get these errors? How are they presented to you?
Yeah, so many errors you just don't notice because let's say you have an application running that is serverless, say on App Engine or on Cloud Run or Cloud Functions. There are crashes happening and you just don't notice them because Google automatically restarts servers and takes care of all of that for you and reroutes the traffic and all of that. And I'm sorry, what was the question, Kyle?
So that's a great answer to kick it off there as part of the serverless structure and how Google with GCP kind of helps with keep the servers up without you having to manage anything. So it's those kind of errors. What about application level errors? And like what is tooling that, as a DevOps engineer, like what if my application happens to have errors that aren't at the server level, but it's application, what tooling is available for me as a DevOps engineer?
Oh, right. Now I remember. Yeah. Yeah, first off, I never write bugs in my applications. That simplifies it a lot.
That's easy.
That's easy. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, there will always be bugs, and especially if I write the code, I think. So then, yeah. So there's like these errors that are sort of below the surface you don't even see because they're sort of system errors and a router goes down somewhere or a web server goes down somewhere. We talked about those. Now and then, of course, there are bugs or just unexpected inputs or things like that, and they're sort of bugs in your application. And they all go into cloud monitoring. It is part of your project on Google Cloud Platform. So whether you have whatever product you're using, all of it goes into one place where all the logs are. And in there, you can then set alerts in there. There's a product called Cloud Monitoring that sifts through all these logs. And you can set alerts. So for example, whenever an error occurs or whenever more than 10 of these errors per second, per minute, or per hour occurs, then then let me know. So it is very configurable. But so what you're doing is basically your DevOps team that perhaps before had their hands full just making sure that the servers were alive. Now they can move to more meaningful, higher level monitoring, like were the application errors, or how many shopping carts, how many orders were submitted in the last hour. If that number is low, maybe we have a problem. Or how fast are the services? They're more meaningful metrics, I think, and closer to the business actually, because the easy stuff, keeping the service alive, has been taken care of.
Gotcha. So one of the things that GCP does very well is it automatically sets up a lot of the stuff for you, in the DevOps position, to where really all you have to do is, as you were, finishing up there, it's really the metrics and the monitoring and the reporting is really what you like. You decide what features I need reported on and metrics I need, and GCP kind of helps do the initial setup of everything for you. So it's already monitoring, but you still have that capability to configure it a little bit.
Yep, that's right.
Awesome. Let's see so I do have a couple of questions prepared, but those of you who are tuning in, feel free to ask any questions in the live chat over on the side. Martin is more than happy to take any of your questions about DevOps, GCP, and building web apps on GCP. So feel free to drop your questions over there on the chat. One of the other questions that I had, so this is, we were talking about serverless a little bit. And so with serverless, you don't have to worry about the infrastructure. And we're building a web app that's going out on GCP. Let's say we're using App Engine. Okay. And so we know where our code is being hosted. But now we have to think about our database. So what are some options that we have available for a database, and how does that play into the DevOps role?
Yep, right. So when I build applications, I always try to if possible, pick a serverless database to go with my serverless compute. So as you said, we have, in this case, we have our code on App Engine, means that Google takes care of spinning up and down servers. So now I want the database to be the same, right? The database I go for first is, if I can do it, I will use Firestore. And that is a NoSQL document database. You read and write JSON. It's very easy to work with. It's like one line of code to read, one line of code to write something. And the serverless. So you don't have to deal with rebalancing stuff and truncating the log and setting up lots of parameters. Google scales it for you. And also one other thing actually with Firestore that I really like is that in some cases, many cases actually, you may be able to connect your client, your web client or mobile client, directly to the database. Typically, you have like business logic sitting in there sort of between them, right? Your client makes a call to some web service in the middle who calls the database, who returns to the client. But with Firestore, you can connect directly from the client into the database and just define what user is allowed to see what, or read or write what. And now all of a sudden that middle layer kind of disappears or becomes smaller, which is nice, less code.
Definitely less code. And that's what helps keep it real time as well.
Oh, that's right. Because very good point. I forgot all about that. Yeah, because if something is updated here in Firestore, it will notify your client. So a value changed or a new chat was made chat message was made in the chat room. The client now learns that, a new row was added in the database and can update its UI. So so Firestore, I try to always use that if I can. But now there are some cases where you really need a SQL database, right? If you do financials or you're doing a lot of aggregations and sums and averages and medians and things like that. Firestore and document databases aren't great for that. So then I would use Cloud SQL. And it is MySQL or Postgres or SQL Server flavor. It is server full though, so you need to sort of tweak a server and decide how much memory you want and things like that. But sometimes you just need SQL, so it's worth it.
For sure. And for those who haven't used Cloud SQL before, are there any learning curves or gotchas, if you will, coming from an on-prem SQL installation, whether it's MySQL or other, and like you're moving to Cloud SQL? Are there any differences, or what is the kind of how would you treat Cloud SQL any differently, if at all?
Right. I think that so while the database speaks MySQL, the MySQL protocol or Postgres or SQL Server, you get to choose. There are some things that just are a little different, and you have a little if you're a DBA used to having an on-prem database or database you can walk up to and kick, or at least a machine you control fully, there are a lot of things knobs you can tweak. When it's Cloud SQL in the Google Cloud, there are slightly fewer knobs. And for example, instead of writing your own scripts for database backup, you select, when you want your database backup to happen in a dropdown. So I've seen DBAs. You need to just learn what this new, slightly more simplified world looks like. I think it's nice that it's simplified, but it is a little bit of getting used to it.
Yeah, and I was kind of setting you up for success on that one, because it is a much simpler interface. That there is more of a GUI, graphical user interface, where as a DevOps engineer, you're going in kind of selecting things. You're not necessarily having to write all the scripts yourself. Google kind of handles that for you in the background using the GUI interface. So it's but I definitely love how you put it, the more simplified way and much easier
right.
to putting that together.
But as a DBA, if you worked for years with a local database you can touch, then you might feel the sort of phantom pains of there are certain things that you do. You can still take backups, but you do it a little differently, and it will feel a little weird at first, perhaps.
Gotcha. We've been talking a lot about serverless, and with building out serverless, we've talked a little bit about App Engine, Firestore as serverless options. What are some other serverless options that to build out a web app? If it wasn't App Engine, wasn't Firestore, what other serverless options would you pick?
Right.
Because you mentioned Firestore would be your first go-to. What would be your first go-to to host your code?
Yeah. So there are a few different ways of thinking about this. So App Engine, of course, is sort of batteries included. Everything works great there. I see increasingly web applications being mostly client-side code, or more and more client-side code and less server-side code. And many web apps actually take it so far that they have virtually no server-side code. So it's basically HTML and JavaScript, and it's sent to the client. And if your web app would work with that treatment, then you can just have your JavaScript and HTML and all that stuff on Firebase hosting. And Firebase hosting is just dumb hosting. Well, it's pretty smart because it has a CDN and all that stuff, but you don't see it. Yeah. I tried setting up a CDN myself once. It was so hard. So it's nice. Firebase hosting just has it. But yeah, so you may be able to get away with just hosting static HTML and JavaScript and images and CSS. And then Firebase hosting is amazing. And then almost invariably, there will be like a few things you will need server-side code for. So then you can very easily just use Google Cloud Functions for that. And it's very nice because then you can have JavaScript on your client, and you can have JavaScript in the server on Cloud Functions. So that's one way of doing this sort of very UI-heavy app that has a lot of UI, a lot of client-side. And that is, some people call that the jam stack. The client is smart and the server isn't that smart. And then if you want a smarter server, or you want to run more complex things, or maybe you want to do image processing or more complex or heavy things on the server, then I think for that kind of stuff, I use Cloud Run. Because with Cloud Run, you can just say, here's my container, and it contains my code, all my libraries, even binary libraries, and I just send that up to Google, and Google runs it, and I can have almost anything in that container that can run on Linux. So that's great for heavier server-side processing.
Definitely. And so what are some DevOps controls for Cloud Run? Like as a DevOps engineer, what would I use to monitor Cloud Run instances?
Yeah. So Cloud Run, of course, it's servers. It's called serverless, but of course there's servers under, if you look under the covers.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you will
Hidden
see
under
pretty
there somewhere.
graphs. Yeah, all right. So you will see some graphs in there where you can see like, oh, my thing is running. Google thinks that I should have 8 servers. It means install my container on 8 servers. Okay, cool. And oh, now it's 7. Oh, now it went up to 9. And you can monitor that if you want to. But typically, what is interesting from a DevOps perspective is, of course, response time. So requests come in, how quickly does it return the response? And you might also want to monitor memory consumption, because that is one of the knobs you can set on Cloud Run, is how much memory your containers have. So if you have a lot of image processing, you might notice that you sort of run up against memory limits, and then you might get better performance by increasing memory. Oh, and my favorite setting, actually, I almost forgot. My favorite setting is that launched fairly recently on Cloud Run was min instances, minimum instances. So with the default, Cloud Run will, if there hasn't been a call to your container for the last 20 minutes or so, Google will just spin all your instances down. But that means that when that one new request comes in, the first request that comes in will take a little longer because it was be a cold start. Yeah. But if I set min instances, I can tell Google never scale down to 0, scale down to like 1 server. So then you reduce the impact of cold starts a lot. It's a very useful knob.
Very useful knob. Is it based on, like, as a DevOps engineer, is this something that I would just play with as I'm seeing how users use my app, how many instances, or would you say just to leave it at 1, as I'm launching so this is a brand new app that's been launched, would I set it to default of 1 already, or would this be something that I would wait until like a month before I set it to a default of 1?
Oh, right. I think that for most apps, you probably just want to leave it at the default and see how things go. And then I do notice one thing that many developers do, DevOps people do, I think incorrectly, where they look at what is the slowest response time I had. And it was like, well, on Saturday morning, I had this one request that came back and took 4 seconds. And oh my gosh, we need to get that down. That there will always be slow responses, whether you do server full or serverless. So I encourage everybody to look at their P99 value. So 99% of my requests completed under 400 milliseconds, say, and have your goals should be around P99. And then it may turn out, depending on the traffic you get, it may turn out that cold starts just aren't. I mean, there was one last week, and sure, that was 4 seconds, but your P99 value is still good. So always measure P99 first. Having said that, sometimes you just know that your service has to be lightning fast all the time. For example, I recently wrote a service that is auto-completion for when a user types city names. You type M and you want to do sort of Mumbai, Melbourne to show up. That needs to be super fast all the time. So for that service, I actually set min instance to 1 to start with.
Gotcha.
And it's also, of course, a trade-off. You pay a little bit for that reserved instance.
Very true. So we're kind of dipping into the FinOps a little bit there. Obviously, there's something to be aware of. You would never have like min instances of 10, for example. Is there a max that it allows you to do with that knob?
Probably, but I don't know what the max is actually.
It wouldn't necessarily be smart to dial it up all the way, probably.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it depends on your budget.
Yeah, well, yeah, because that's with your budget, but that doesn't. The more instances you have doesn't necessarily mean it's faster. Is kind of what you were alluding to, because there's different things with whether it's serverless or server full. There's your application is the thing that sometimes is the delay. It's not always the response time of the server, the latency.
Right. Yep, definitely. You can write code in a smart way and in a not so smart way. Yeah.
Yeah. With so you were starting to get into the P99 and discussing, what the targets. So, trying to figure out what's, when you're trying to budget downtime. So that's something that happens to all of our apps. There's, as we started off in the beginning talking about, we are so great that we don't write any bugs, but then a bug appears. So how can, what are some tools, or how would you recommend, whether it's Cloud Run or one of GCP's other tools, like how can we budget this downtime? Like what are some options available to us?
Yep. So you can monitor downtime in cloud monitoring and set up dashboards and all that good stuff for that. One thing that I think is really important about downtime is that you should have an error budget and a an uptime availability of 100% is usually not desirable. Because the only way you're going to get an uptime of 100% is to never release new code. So of course, we all work with business people we're all developers here. We can talk about them when they're not here. They will, of course, always say 100% uptime. We should have that. I think it's our responsibility as developers and DevOps people to say, sure, but it's a trade-off. If we set 100% uptime, that means we can't do new releases. So so it's basically agility versus availability. If I want to be super agile and have many releases every day and be really responsive to customers, I need to tolerate some downtime. So now, of course, the question becomes, how do you strike that balance? And the way I think about it, and this is a fairly common practice, and Google recommends, and the DevOps books recommend, but it is that you say, okay, my downtime can be, an hour a month or a certain number of hours per month, or whatever. And then you see like, oh, we have had no downtime so far this month. We haven't taken any of that budget. Oh, then we can take some chances. Let's release, a few more new features. It's okay because we haven't used that budget. Then, next month rolls around and there are lots of outages. Well, now that means you've hit your budget, or you're on target to hit your budget out time. Then that means, okay, we scale back on releases because now we need to not go over the budget. So I find that is a good way of using, budgets to manage availability versus agility.
Nice, very cool. And so with cloud monitoring, you're able to see that. Are you able to set any sort of limits? I mean, there's the ability to set limits on when you should be warned at a certain time, but when you're monitoring the downtimes over a given time period, what are some options available from cloud monitoring in order to differentiate, because this is downtime of your application or downtime of the instance? Like, is there a way to differentiate the two?
Typically in a serverless setting, you think of the downtime of the service, not the server, because Google spins up and down servers all the time. So you set up your monitoring to hit, for example, hit your initial page, make sure that somewhere on that page this text is mentioned, just so you don't get an empty page back. So that could be how you monitor a service. Another service could be like submit a test shopping cart to this backend service, and do that every minute or every 5 minutes, and make sure that it works. And then you can, in the monitoring tools, you can actually you can define an SLO, a service level objective, and say, this is my error budget, and you can do that sort of thing there.
Very cool. So we talked a little bit about the application or service, the the instance or service layer, and a little bit about the application. So diving into the application a little bit, typically when we think about application errors, it's going to be more so, server side code errors and stuff like that. How do we handle, we talked a little bit about, we're building a web app, so we're going to have some JavaScript errors, unfortunately. I mean, all the different browsers out there, and we're shipping some new code. So how do we handle JavaScript errors with the cloud monitoring or GCP?
Very good point, especially if you're doing this Jamstack thing, right? Where you have very little processing on the server and it all happens on the client. And as you say, you have like, a new version of the Samsung browser, Have you tested that? Maybe, maybe not, who knows? Or some Chinese browser becomes super popular and we haven't even heard about it. So you need monitoring on the client. And this is an area where I see a lot of web applications. It's a blind spot for many of us. One thing that I found that is the simplest and most affordable thing to do to get started is hopefully you have Google Analytics on your website already. And if not, go and install it now. It's super simple. And then in Google Analytics, you can write, in JavaScript, you can write a global error handler that is like window.onError, I believe it's called. And in that onError handler, that is like if any unhandled error happens anywhere in your JavaScript, that snippet of code will be triggered. And in that snippet of code, you can send an event to Google Analytics. And that event could contain, the name of the stack trace of the exception. You also know the navigation.user agent. You know what browser you're on because you're in JavaScript. Send that along to the server as well. And then in Google Analytics now, you go into event tracking, and all of those errors show up as events. And you can see what browsers are causing most errors and what are the stack traces from them. So that's the first level, and that's free. Google Analytics is free unless you have a lot of traffic, and writing that on error handler is free. Now, if it's a really critical application, or you want to go beyond that free tier, then there are other tools that third parties that are not Google, that have these tools that sort of record everything a user does, and you can replay sessions and all of that. But that's outside Google.
Definitely.
And they cost money.
And most of the time they cost money for sure. Yeah, we do have a couple audience questions that we can go ahead and pull in. So from Tariq, any hands-on training resources that you recommend for DevOps on GCP?
I think the way I learn, and this is different for different people, the way I learn are two ways. I'm a visual learner. Some others are, and not everybody. But I think one good way to learn about serverless, if I might toot my own horn here, is the Serverless Expeditions video series. Yeah, because we take questions from YouTube comments and then create new videos. Like, people ask, how should I authenticate my serverless application? How should I, connect to stuff in my virtual private cloud from serverless and so on? So whenever we get those questions, we create a new video about it. So go to YouTube and search for Serverless Expeditions. The other way I learn personally, and this Tariq may apply to you or not, but is actually get my hands dirty, write stuff on the keyboard, make it break, make it work. And Quick Labs is great for that. So I think it's QWIK, right?
LABS. Yep.
LABS. Yeah. Quick Labs. QWIK Labs. So Quick Labs, and then you can search in there for almost every Google product covered, and in that you can do a Quick Lab like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, where you actually sit and you do prepared exercises. You download some code, you fix a bug in it, or you deploy something. And after so it's a very efficient way. Instead of trying to read all the docs and figure it out and write your own application, which might take days and weeks, you can, in 30 minutes, you can have a very good hands-on learning experience in Quick Labs.
Definitely. And something to add to that, and another plug back into our community program. So if you are part of a GDG or a Google Developer Group, or if you're part of our Google Developer Student Clubs, they host events around the Quick Labs. We call them Cloud Study Jams. And that's a lot of time we give them the opportunity to have these trainings for free, to where it's free credits to get into Quick Labs. There are some paid labs within Quick Labs, but to plus one and add on to what Martin was talking about, with Quick Labs, a lot of the tools within GCP that you get to use that may not necessarily have a free tier, you get to play with them, break them, add a bunch of data, click all the buttons, and for free, that without having to worry about the free tier or anything like that, before you go and actually implement them as part of your personal project or your company's project. You can toy them. So join your local GDG or DSC to get some of that hands-on learning resources to see what some of the stuff that Martin's been talking about looks like under the hood.
Yeah, right. I've learned so much attending Google Developer Groups and GDGs, and I think you even used to run one, Kyle.
Yes, yeah, I kicked one off in Kansas City, and ran that for a few years, and now I'm here at Google.
Yeah.
And so we since then our program has grown quite a bit, where now we have the Google Developer Student Clubs, which are clubs at each university that run very similar type of events, like the Cloud Study Jams, where and a lot of times we can help bring speakers like Martin to your campus or your city with a GDG to talk more about stuff that we've been talking about here today. Martin has a whole bunch of talks that he has prepared that he loves, and he loves traveling or virtually coming to your community. Same here. It's always fun talking to engineers and developers about this. I do see we have another question from Daniel. Let me pull that up. So, are there any books regarding DevOps that you would recommend? Because you did allude to certain DevOps books that are defined, like how DevOps is defined, or like if I were to, here are the metrics that as a DevOps engineer I should be looking for. So
Yep. Yeah, right. I love books too. Yeah. I think one great way. So first off, a book that is electronic, or you can get it on paper if you prefer. That is, it's written by Googlers, and it is sort of the synthesized, put together, composited the years and years, probably person centuries of knowledge in running Google systems, and what we've learned from doing DevOps on those, which is way more than we would be able to fit and talk about in this episode. And that book is, I forget what it's called, but I always search for Google DevOps book and then it comes up. And it has great stuff about, for example, I used to think that you should measure average latency or maximum latency. That book talks about how, no, you should measure this P99 or P95 value. 99 or 95% of my requests come in under this time, and talks about why you should do it that way. And tons of little nuggets like that. So yeah, unless you remember what it's called, I would say search for Google DevOps book.
Yeah, I'm sure we can find it back. Have one of our folks backstage find that and drop that in for us. But I assume that's where you're going to, like, it's a book that would help walk through like deployment frequency, lead time for changes, the change failure rate. A lot of DORA, I think, was the acronym for all the different things that as a DevOps engineer you're supposed to be looking after.
Right. So exactly. So this book talks about, it is fairly in depth, and talks about a lot of the technology and how to measure. And then I would say that a great companion to that book, or if you're not into reading a book but would like to skim a website instead and get the sort of top level overview of it in an hour rather than read a book, which can take many hours, I would go to the Google DevOps side where the DORA research is, as you mentioned, Kyle. Yeah, because that is a project where it's not only what Googlers have learned, but also they have a survey every year where they interview people in hundreds of companies and bring all that knowledge in, and they have best practices. So, for example, they the learnings on the DORA website, the Google DevOps website, they're a little higher level than what's in the book. So, but it's really interesting. It has things like what numbers should you measure? Availability, maybe, yeah, but that website, for example, makes the case that you know that you have a good DevOps if you have a high deployment frequency. So you don't deploy, once every 6 months, once every month, once every week. If you deploy multiple days per week, that means you have, or multiple times per day, that means you have great processes. It also talks about lead time for changes. How long does it take from a developer checking in code until it's on the website? If you make that shorter, you become more agile. Change failure rate is another one. We make 100 deployments. How many of those were failures? You should measure that. And then the final number that website advocates is time to restore service. So I had a failure, I deployed a bad version. How long does it take for me to, restore the database back up, or push out roll back, or restore service? So if you measure those 4 numbers, you get a really good sense of where your organization is and how mature it is in DevOps. And then you will invariably won't be all great in all those 4. So then you will know which one you're doing worse in compared to mature DevOps organizations. It's all on the website. And then you focus on that 1 or 2 or maybe 3 metrics and try to make those better.
Yeah, and one thing to add too is that it's not, one of the things that you mentioned, like deployment frequency, like having a high deployment frequency doesn't necessarily mean it's great if all the other ones are failing. So like it, as you've been alluding to, it's these knobs that you have to keep playing with and keep tuning to make sure you're like everything is harmonized. It's not just crank this one to 11 and then not mess with the other ones. You have to treat all 4 of those equally and figure out what's the right the harmonious levels to set everything.
Exactly. And then also it has, like, if you want to address, say, one of them, deployment frequency, for example, then that website has pointers as to what you would do, what processes you would put in place to get there. So you're not just in the dark. It's a really good website, and just spend an hour on that website and you will learn so much.
Awesome.
And I saw it was here. Yeah, cloud.google.com/DevOps.
Yes. And then we have another one, sre.google/resources for additional resources. So that was one of the terms coined by Google, the site reliability engineer, which is kind of like DevOps on steroids, if you will, where it goes into a lot more than just per application. It's more about data centers and stuff like that. So if you want to grow and scale a lot more of that too. We did have another question from Joanne. If we can get that pulled up here. Yes. So as a Google certified DevOps engineer, what are the GCP tools or services needed to mainly focus? Mainly focus on as a DevOps engineer, or I guess
probably. I think that the GCP tools and services, I am looking into, so the ones to look for, of course, is cloud monitoring, really important one. But it lets you set up dashboards, it lets you set uptime alerts, measure availability of your systems, even measure service level objectives and alerts, and dashboards. You can create
And
that.
so the email alerts is part of that.
Yeah, email alerts, SMS, text alerts. That's a really good one. Another one that I've been playing with a lot recently is tracing. So this is called cloud tracing. And this is really useful for if you want to troubleshoot some service is slow, because remember, performance is a feature. Your services should be fast, otherwise people won't use them. If you want to troubleshoot that, you can then, from cloud tracing, you can get really nice diagrams of, handling the HTTP package took this much time, hitting the database took that much time. You get these sort of bars, and hitting this other API took this long. And so you get these really nice bar charts so you can easily see what takes time and where to spend your engineering resources. There is, there's also error reporting. So this is a pretty smart service. You can look in your logs and new errors will pop up there, of course, and you can set it up so you get alerts. But not errors are created equal. So in error reporting, that tool will tell you things like, hey, we got a brand new error we've never seen before. Or we got an error, we got 100 of these errors last night. We saw them last week and last month as well. So maybe that's not such a big deal. But error reporting is really smart about recognizing errors, and will save you a lot of manual time trawling through logs by sort of figuring out what's important.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've dug into the cloud logging, and it's invaluable on like how deep and informational sometimes it is, and it's helped quite a bit on an application launch where it's like it works, but why am I getting this one little error that I wouldn't have known about necessarily had the logging not picked that up. So it was something that didn't happen on one of the instances. So it was just like a deployment issue, which was my bad. But the site still worked. It was just a deployment issue that had the logging not presented that to me, I wouldn't have noticed it, because the site was working. So it was a weird little thing that, I just made a tweak to my deployment script, and I was no longer seeing the error, which could have been a much bigger error, potentially further on. But yeah, so it's very nice to have that logging, as you were mentioning. One of the other things that we kind of we highlighted and hinted at earlier was about FinOps. And can you talk a little bit more about FinOps and how if we're running in a serverless fashion here, Google automatically starts scaling things, and like you're like all of these resources are automatically scaled. How do you prevent yourself from running out of money here on GCP?
Right. Yes, exactly. You scale up, you have more users, and Google is happily scaling everything up for you and happily charging you more all the way.
Here's more instances.
Right. Yeah, no problem. I will just do it for you and charge you for it. So sometimes, and this can be difficult, right? Because if you buy a server, honest physical server you can touch, you spent a certain number of dollars on that, it's in your budget, it's easy to budget for that. If you instead use pay as you go serverless, it's harder to budget because you don't know, you might get a lot of traffic on Black Friday and not so much traffic the week before. And pay as you go, how am I going to budget for that? And also I get a lot of questions about, like, what if there's a denial of service attack on me, or my website just gets featured on on Facebook somewhere. Somebody has 1 million followers, and I get lots of people coming to my website.
All of a sudden it ramps up, but then the popularity drops back to a more normal level afterwards. So that's one of the fears that a lot of people I launch my app, you get that instant popularity. And so you were talking about buying the server. I bought a bunch of servers, but then now I'm not as popular. What happens?
Yeah. Right. So first off, serverless scales up and down so that you pay a lot when you're super popular and not so much when you're not popular. And hopefully when you're super popular, it means that you're selling more on your website, or you get some sort of more value out of your website. So hopefully, having a lot more traffic, sure, you pay Google more, but hopefully that means you have more revenue or more business use somehow from your website. But then, of course, one might say, when I'd set up my server farm of 3 web servers, a database server, a firewall machine, and so on, I knew what my budget would be. Even if I got very popular, the system could only serve so many people. My system wouldn't start demanding more money from me. In serverless, the system will scale up and charge more. So in that case, you can, for example, in Cloud Run, you can say max instances, just like you can say min instances, always never scale to 0. You can say max instances, never spin up more than 10 machines. You have to ask yourself, though, why you're doing that, because hopefully you don't want to turn people away, right? If more people come to you, it's a good problem to have. Hopefully that means you make more money or have more use of your website. But you can cap it. Often people say, well, I want to cap it because I'm afraid of a bot attack or something like that. And then I think it's a really poor way to start turning bots and regular users away if there is an attack on your website. It is far better than to use, for example, Cloud Armor, have that sitting in front of your service to fight those, defend against those attacks. And there are plenty of third-party tools that does that as well. But hopefully, when it scales up, traffic scales up, your cloud bill scales up, hopefully that means your revenue scales up as well, so it's not a problem.
Nice.
And then,
I was just interject about Cloud Armor. Can you go into a little bit more detail on Cloud Armor because I'm sure many of the folks tuning in aren't as aware that that's a feature of GCP.
Right. Yep. So there is a service called Cloud Armor. You can put it in front of services, and what it does, it has things like, if you notice a lot of attacks from crazy amount of traffic from certain IP addresses, you can just say nope, don't serve those addresses, and then you would use that in conjunction with perhaps budget alerts, or you can set alerts so that I have that on one of my hobby projects, for example. If it ever wants to charge more, if my monthly bill, my monthly bill goes up and up and up every day, right, during the month, and if it ever hits this dollar amount, let me know right away. So then I can go in and check things like, oh, is something weird going on, or is this just that I'm a super popular person, or I have a super popular website, I should say.
Yeah, both. Yeah. And this is based on monthly budgets, is how you're able to configure all of this. You wouldn't be able to. Can you get as granular as a daily budget? Probably not.
Yep. So this alert is a monthly budget. That's right. So you say, like, if my budget if my bill ever gets $2,000, I want to know, day 1 it's not that, day 2 is not that, day 3 is not that. Maybe on day 10 you hit the 1,000 and then you get the alert. Another way that I always advise people is to set up. You can, with 1 click or maybe 2 clicks, you can say, send all my billing data to BigQuery. And BigQuery is an analytics database. And then you can write SQL statements against that. Or if you're not into that, you can connect BigQuery to Data Studio. And Data Studio is a business intelligence tool. You basically click and drag and drop and draw charts there. So there you can draw actually charts of, like, how much did I spend yesterday? How much did I spend today? And put that on a graph. So you can go in there every day and see if it starts running away from you. And you can actually import data from Google Analytics there as well. So you could put up a chart where you have what I pay in GCP per day, and then how many visitors I had that day. And hopefully they follow each other. And if they diverge, you need to investigate.
Yeah, investigate, see how to help with those conversions if your site traffic is going this way, but your sales aren't.
See,
why aren't you making these conversions?
Right.
Another thing, so you mentioned we've talked about being able to get like SMS, email alerts whenever this monitoring. What are some other forms of monitoring that we can have? So as DevOps, so we're always on call, but not in a sense. But how can we? What are some other options available to us to get these monitoring alerts, or just quickly check on the status?
Yeah. So I think, yeah, cloud monitoring, you can build dashboards. You can go in and look at them if you don't want to be alerted. Email alerts, SMS alerts.
We also have the mobile app.
Oh, yes, of course. I keep forgetting. Yes. So, right. Thank you. Mobile app. There's a Google Cloud Platform app, I think it's called. That's it. And it has that error reporting smarts built into it. So if it notices a new error in your logs, it will tell you and send a notification to your phone. And your phone will have a notification. You can go in and see what is that new error that hasn't been seen in the logs before.
Definitely, yeah. And so that kind of, yeah, I was going to say that kind of helps keep your email inbox a little clean, so that way you're not inundated with error messages or having to worry about the cost of SMS messaging or anything like that to the whole team. I believe there are other ways to integrate it with team collaboration. Things like, so you could have it show up in your Google Chat, for example, or other team collaboration tools like Slack, stuff like that. So the monitoring can also appear in those resources as well.
You can set it up. Yeah, the most generic way of doing it is you can click a box and that says, Google, please send my application a pub sub message. And then your code can handle that pub sub message, and it might do specific custom things or turn off things, or you decide at that point whatever you want to do.
Yeah, definitely. We do have one more question from David, just to wrap up here. Do you have any great examples of cloud monitoring, or an example dashboard? Where can we point some of the viewers to see? Because we've been talking a lot about these great dashboards that cloud monitoring can put together for you. What are some examples that resources that they can look at?
Yep, I think the regular product documentation, which I think is search for Google Cloud Monitoring. Basically, and then if you're not happy with them and want more customized things, I would really recommend taking a look at Data Studio. I really like that product. For some reason, Google doesn't talk a lot about it. I don't know why. It's an amazing product, because you just say, like, read from big data over here, from analytics over there, from my SQL database over there, and just put it all together and create pretty charts and set these and those colors and these and those filters, and now you have a super customized dashboard without even writing one line of code.
Awesome. Yeah, Data Studio is pretty powerful in a lot of that sense too. And one of the nice things that we can share about Data Studio is that you can pull in from multiple data sources. So you can pull in from cloud, you can pull in from BigQuery, you can also pull in from Google Analytics. You can write your own hooks to bring in from your own data sources, third-party APIs. But the really nice thing is, as we were kind of talking about with the business types that, they don't necessarily need access to the cloud console, or they don't need access to, where all the data comes from. With Data Studio, you can build them an interface that they can check without having to need all the access to, your cloud project, for example, stuff like that. So you can set it up to where it's a more simplified view, to where what they're focused on versus what you need as a DevOps engineer to ensure uptime, downtime, bandwidth, budgeting, all that stuff. So it's this way you can have the two different dashboards set up.
Yeah, and what I found when I started using Data Studio is that I gradually added more and more reports to it because it just was so easy, so easy to create them there, and more technical reports I added there as well. So I have some sort of business facing stuff and technical facing stuff, just because it's also nice. It looks so good. It's so easy to read, and it's so easy to tweak with a few clicks if I need to change something. Really powerful product.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Martin, for joining us. We had a great time learning a little bit more about DevOps and FinOps and how that all ties into GCP. I know I learned about a couple of new things that I want to go test out and try out. So hopefully everybody else in the audience, we shared a lot of great resources. So thank you for your help on guiding us through building and launching a web app on GCP. And any parting words for the audience?
I think, well, thank you for having me, Kyle. This has been a lot of fun. I think that today, there's never been a better time to be a developer. I used to work in startups back in 2000, 1999, 2000, 2001, a few years after that. And there was so much grunt work we did that wasn't adding value, like putting a busted power supply back into a server, that crazy stuff. Now we can do so much more. There's never been a better time to be a developer than today. It's very exciting.
Awesome. And what was your web show again on YouTube?
Oh, right. Serverless Expeditions. Look for it on YouTube, and there's a playlist. And every Thursday, there's a new episode.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Martin. It was a pleasure having you. And for everyone, we have monthly topics. Next month, we're going to be talking about Android. So stay tuned for that episode. You can sign up to learn more at goo.gle/between the brackets. And that way you can stay up to date with what we're doing. You could also refer to links there to view our past episodes as well. And with that, I wanted to thank Martin again and thank everyone for tuning in. And we'll see you next time.